Hi guys, it's Ella here, and today I will guide you on how I choose a resin for my project. I have been working with epoxy resin for about 6 years now, and I make a variety of things. I do some medium things like coasters and trays, I do larger things like flower preservation, and then smaller things like jewelry. So each of them require a different type of resin, and different steps also require a different type of resin. But how do you know which one to use for what? And that's what we will be talking about today. So this is very important because epoxy resin is a two-part chemical. Once you mix the two parts together, it will create a chemical reaction, allowing it to harden into whatever form or shape you pour your resin onto. Because it is a chemical, so for safety reasons, you want to make sure you are using the right type of resin properly for your project. Before we begin, I just want to make a very important note that there is no universal best resin. The results that we get from our resin will vary based on our work environment, our process, and even the tools that we use. And each resin is also formulated differently. So just to share a little story with you, when I was on the search for a resin that works best for me, I tried this one resin out and I got really good results, but it gave me headaches even with the respirator on and stuff. So it just didn't really work well for me. Despite the results. A lot of artists still use it though, and they make really nice work with it. So there's nothing wrong with the resin, it just doesn't like me, I guess, you know? So that resin is not the best resin for me, but it's the best for other people. So just to reiterate my point, that there is no universal best resin out there. Another thing before we begin is that I will not be comparing brands of resin here. We will be comparing different types of resin and what each type is best used for. So I actually outlined my video, and I did this outline like 10-15 times already, trying my best to give you the information in a way that makes sense. And each time I also felt like I was missing something, so I had to redo it and add things in. So I'm hoping I don't miss anything, and I'm hoping I don't confuse you. But if you have any questions along the way, just let me know in the comments, and maybe I can do better with writing it out. Yeah, but ask me any questions in the comments if you're confused with any part of this video. Let's get started. So when I am picking a resin for my project, the first thing that I look for in the instructions is the maximum pour depth of the resin. That is how thick I can pour each layer without causing any problems. If you pour beyond the maximum pour depth, you risk the resin flash curing. So basically what happens is that the resin gets too hot. When you mix the two parts together, it releases heat, and pouring too much means too much heat is being generated. So it gets to the point where the resin is bubbling and it hardens right away, and that is what flash curing is. It is also very toxic because of all the VOCs that will be released into your workspace when that happens. So we generally do not want to pour beyond the maximum pour depth according to the instructions of that specific resin. I don't know if this is true, but I feel like it is because I notice similarities in different brands when it comes to naming their different types of resin, and I think it is based on the maximum pour depth. I feel like there is this misconception that resin is categorized by its ratio. When a lot of people ask for assistance, they will point out that they use a 1-to-1 ratio resin or a 2-to-1 ratio resin. What went wrong? I want to say that generally 1-to-1 ratio acts this way, 2-to-1 ratio acts this way, and 3-to-1 ratio acts a certain way, but that is not true at all. Two of the resins that I use are Totable High Performance Resin and Totable Thickset Fathom Resin. They are both 2-to-1 ratio resin, but one of them I use for smaller things like coasters and trays. The other one I use for thicker pours like floral blocks. So one of them I can only pour up to 1/4 inch deep, and the other one I can pour up to 3 inches deep. And they are both 2-to-1 ratio resin. That said, it is very important to read the instructions for the maximum pour depth of your resin, because if I just followed a general rule for 2-to-1 ratio resin and I poured my high performance resin 3 inches deep, that is going to flash cure right away. So across different brands, they will generally have a tabletop resin, a casting resin, and a deep pour resin. Tabletop resins and coating resins generally have a maximum pour depth of a 1/8 inch deep. Casting resins, they generally say 1/4 or 1/2 inch deep. Deep pore resins go from 2 inches to 4 inches. Then some brands also have an artist resin, which I think is kind of similar to coating resin but with a longer work time. And this actually leads to the second thing that I look for when I am choosing a resin, the work time. So the work time of a resin is basically how long you have to manipulate your resin from when you first mix it to when it starts to gel. Once your resin reaches a gel-like state, any manipulations you make to your piece may not level back out and you'll end up with bumpy surfaces. So now back to the coating resin example and the artist resin example. I used the Total tabletop resin, and Total also has an artist resin that is called the Maker Epoxy. The tabletop resin has a 20-minute work time and the Maker Epoxy has a 60-minute work time. I actually use the tabletop resin for my ocean art because I prefer the 20-minute work time. I like that after creating my ocean designs, it won't move too much afterwards. The longer work time of the Maker Epoxy is great for situations where you have to mix up a bunch of colors for things like geo designs, or if you just prefer a longer work time. The work time also decreases if you just let a resin sit there. So if you still have a lot of resin in your mixing cup, as it approaches the work time, it will cure faster and faster, and you may end up with a flash curing scenario just because it's past the work time and you still have a good bit of resin in your mixing cup. That is one of the mistakes that I still make. So I do prefer a longer work time if possible. I am a slower worker. So the work time is something more of a preference and based on what you're making. So those are the two main things that I look for when I am deciding what resin to use for my project: the maximum pour depth and the work time. I will show you where I find that information and a lot more useful tips and tricks. But before that, I just want to touch upon two more resins that are not epoxy resin but very widely used. One is UV resin. A lot of people starting out probably use UV resin. They are cured with the UV light, and because of that, it allows you to create pieces within minutes. They are mainly used for smaller pieces. If you try to pour larger pieces with it, it may not cure properly because that's not what it's meant for. The UV light may not penetrate through opaque colors as well, so there are limitations to that. But a lot of people use them for small things like jewelry, earrings and pendants, and I use it mainly for patching up bubbles and any imperfections. You can also do a lot with it if you just pour in thin layers too. I have a tutorial on my channel where I use UV resin to decorate some hair clips. It is super cute, so maybe you can watch that after this video if you're interested. The other type of resin that is very common is acrylic resin. I've also used this on my channel a little bit in the past. If you search up Total Razzo or aqua resin, you will find some of the pieces that I made with acrylic resin. Acrylic resin is a powder and liquid mixture, and it's kind of like plaster or cement. That's the best way for me to describe it. I don't know if manufacturers don't like it when we describe it like that, but I think that is the easiest way for you to get a picture in your head of what it is. They take color really well, but the pieces will come out opaque and kind of a matte texture. It gives off a different vibe, but they're very fun to work with. You can't really use them to preserve something in. Oh, and because it is a powder and liquid mixture, it is non-toxic, so you don't need a respirator, but I do suggest a dust mask because it is powdery, so you don't want to be breathing in the dust. So yeah, those are two other casting materials that gets talked about when it comes to resin. Just thought it might be something you're interested in, or maybe it will fit well with your project. So yeah, let's go see where we can find the information for what we need when we pick out a resin for our projects. So we are now over at my computer, and I will share my screen with you to show you where I find the data sheet for my resin. I use Total Resin, so that's the website I will be going to. Full transparency, I am a Total ambassador and they do sponsor me some resin to make content with, but I do buy a lot of resin myself because I am also a small business owner, so I sell my products and I need a lot more than what they send me usually. I also use a bunch of different types of resins from them, I think like 4 or 5, and they only send me my go-to resin, which I will be showing you in this snippet. If you want to try out Total resin, I do have a referral link in the description, and you can save some money on your resin if you use my referral link. I do get a little bit of a commission, so it does help my channel, so please use the referral link if you do decide to try out Total resin. I use Total resin for all of my tutorials as well, so you can check out my tutorials to see how I work with specific resins in detail. So now I'll share my screen with you and we'll look at the data sheet together. Okay, so we're on the Totable website right now, and they have a rewards program as well, so you can check that out if you are interested. We are going to resins. They have tabletop high performance on here. We are focusing on epoxy resin right here. And just to show you, they have a lot of different options. That's why this video is important, to talk about the different types of resins out there. And then they actually have information here as well. What epoxy resin is, the different types of epoxy, and marine epoxy. I don't use it, so I'm not too familiar with it. Actually, I do use it, I guess, the Totable high performance one. Okay, yeah. And then uses for epoxy, you know, they have a lot of information on their website, so you can take a look at that when you have the time to. I use the high performance resin, and so just to show you, they have you know, what it's used for. This chart I found recently. They actually uploaded February 2025, so I will go over that in a bit. There is so much information on this, and what you can look at it closer on, you know, if you are trying Totable, but what we are looking for is I used a slow hardener, so this row would matter for me. Okay, so you see here, maximum pore depth per layer. They have very detailed information here, and this is a bunch of information that for me it doesn't quite matter, but if you have specific projects in mind, you may want to look into these, you know, if you require certain strength. Yeah, and then the technical data, more technical data. And this is the data sheet that I am looking for. So this is their data sheet, and there is a lot of information here, and I won't really go over that because it's a lot to look at. It may not be what you need. So they also have a troubleshooting guide here as well, which I think is very beneficial for everyone. So I checked out this troubleshooting guide, and even if you don't use Totable resin, I think it is definitely worth looking at because they go over different scenarios, issues that you will run into working with resin, and it tells you the possible reasons why that happens. The solutions may not work for you because they're most likely geared towards the specific resin, but I do think a lot of the possible issues are pretty general, so it could help you diagnose your problems as well. Okay, now this one is new, like I said, February 2025. They literally just uploaded it last month, depending on when I post the video. Yeah, and so they actually compared the different types of resins here, and it actually is very helpful for you if you are looking into working with Totable resin. Tells you what you can use them for, it tells you the work time right here, and the temperature to work in, and how long it takes to fully cure, the maximum pore depth, you know, all that we discussed. So yeah, that's the Totable website. There's a lot of information there from the suppliers that I think is worth looking into. Now again, you don't have to use Totable. I use Totable and I've been using it exclusively for 5 years now, so that is pretty much the only thing that I know and can help you with if you use Totable as well. If you use another brand, I unfortunately cannot really help because I don't have experience with it. They're all similar but different. Whatever brand you decide to go with, just check out their website, look for the work time and the maximum pore depth, and see how they fit with what you plan to make. If you're using your resin for a certain application that requires a specific flexibility or strength, then you should look at that as well, of course. So it really depends on your project. Just check your supplier's website for the data. Okay, and that is pretty much how I choose a resin for my project, as well as where I find all of my information. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, please like and subscribe and give me some feedback on what you think about this video. If you have any questions or need some more guidance, let me know in the comments, and I will try my best to help you. In the next video of my Resin 101 series, I will go over some common issues we will run into when we are working with epoxy resin and how to fix them. Some of the issues I still run into myself after working with it for all these years. So I will see you in the next video.